Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, ChatGPT in a World of Digital Trust. This is such an exciting topic, and I'm glad to have you here so that we can talk about this very important topic and explore some of the things that are impacting our world. So, welcome again. And with us, we have Chris Ward, who has extensive experience in IT and cybersecurity, project management, and and ITIL certified as well, an instructor for many years. So, we will be leveraging his expertise and his knowledge and learning together as we explore this very hot topic these days, which has to do with ChatGPT. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Dr. Hernan, and excited to be here. Like you said, this is a topic that a lot of people are talking about. You can't go anywhere on whether it's LinkedIn or YouTube or in the news and hearing everything about ChatGPT, which is not the only artificial intelligence AI thing that's out there. But right now, this is the big topic, and I think you would agree with that.
I completely agree. Yes, it's gathered quite a bit of a following and also a lot of attention and our imagination as well. But as we think about this topic and as we abord it, we take on this subject today, let's take a look at the agenda. What are we going to address? And to your point, your original talking points, what is GPT, right? What is it? So let's take a moment to take a look at that, define it, understand it better, and then we're going to start looking in terms of how that connects to this concept of digital trust. So we're going to define that as well. And then we're going to look in terms of how we understand this concept and how they're related. The third thing we're going to do is take a look at what's going on at typical organizations. Most of us are at some point in some kind of, of a spectrum in terms of maturity. And we can look at maturity operational in terms of internal controls, IT, cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to this subject in particular, what are some of the common dynamics we see and what are some of the implications related to that? We're then going to pivot to the need for governance. That has to do with the overall oversight of the organization, the leadership, the strategic direction, and how that is going to be executed. So we're going to make that connection as well. And then we're going to take a look ahead in terms of where we headed, where as far as we can tell right now, because the landscape is evolving even as we speak. So based on what we know now, what does this mean? Bringing all of these subjects together. And by the way, we are also going to allocate some time for questions and answers. So as we're going through the materials, everyone who's listening and watching today, please write your questions and we will take a look at those and we'll respond to those at the end of the session. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes or so. Then we're going to spend a good 20 minutes or thereabouts answering questions. And we look forward to your feedback. By the way, along the way, we're also going to have 3 polling questions, and you need to respond to those 3 so that you're eligible for 1 CPE credit. We need to make sure that you're paying attention, and it will also help us as we get some insights as to what your experiences are as relates to these subjects. So be on the lookout for those polling questions, respond to those, and then at the end, you may be eligible for 1 CPE credit. So we look forward to all of this interaction. So Chris, as we are talking about this, where should we begin as we start exploring this very hot topic, ChatGPT in a world of digital trust?
You know, with everything that's been put out there, there are still many, many people I talk to in the industry that they've heard about ChatGPT. Maybe some of them have even dabbled a little bit, and they usually bring it up for, 20, 30 minutes. They try a few things like write me a joke or tell me a riddle or something like that, or, something like that. And then it's move on. And they're like, I'm not really sure exactly how this is going to help me in my day-to-day business. Maybe they have some ideas, maybe they don't. Especially in my field of project management, IT service management, risk management. These are things that people are asking a lot of questions. But one thing that I find is a lot of times people really don't understand what is ChatGPT. It's a great word. People know that you type in questions. So why don't we start off, Hernan, talking a little bit about this? And so first off, it says chat, and so we kind of get that. But then there's these 3 letters, G, P, and T. Most people have no idea, no clue what that is. Well, it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's actually a type of artificial intelligence, which is based on neural network. So when you see the word neural network, it's probably what you think. It's based on how we would say even our human brain works, the ability to take concepts and associate them and provide even, we would say, a new concept based upon that. These are built on what they're called large language models that they basically take a ton of data, massive amounts of whether it's books or papers or documentation, photos, video. It's basically a huge amount of data, and they begin to analyze structures, different types of relationships between. We could say something like, "Oh, we have a computer that talks to another computer, and it uses networking and it uses a language, and here is the protocols that should run on that." Well, then what you can do is, because of the neural network, it can then begin to make relationships between, like, well, because it's doing this, that can get associated with something over here, which is also very similar to that. And so the system can begin to start making these patterns and relationships and bring it together. And that's essentially what we do as human beings. And what can you get out of this? All kinds of things. You can obviously get text, because that's what ChatGPT primarily does. You'll type in something and say, create for me a paper on the elements of governance, risk, and compliance in relation to the Department of Defense contracts over the past 10 years. And the system will go out and have access to all this information, and it will spit out whatever it is that you are asking for, which is great. But there are other generative pre-trained transform programs and systems out there that can do things like audio, video. Many people are familiar with some of the graphics like Dolly, where, paint for me a picture of my best friend, but make it look like a Monet. And it will literally do that particular thing. Computer code, you can write code for your systems. In fact, quite a few, and this is where we're going to start talking a little bit about this, Hernan, about digital trust, is how many of you are using software right now where some of the code was not written by a human being. It was actually written by ChatGPT or another familiar, or I would say similar type of organization. So you can see, Hernan, already how that can start having an issue with digital trust.
Excellent overview and introduction. And I like your examples as well in terms of some of the things that we can do with it. And yes, there's a variety of different things and applications that are proliferating. And I saw something on one of the social media channels, and I believe there were 120 applications that were profiled in this particular post. And that number keeps growing every day. So a lot of different uses for it. So when we talk about whether it's text or graphics or audio or video, and computer code, we're seeing a lot of uses for it. So this brings us to a question. And we would like to ask those who are listening to take a look at the question that's going to be on display now. Has your organization officially implemented large language model software like ChatGPT? And I asked, the word officially implemented is mentioned there, right? Has your organization officially implemented Oh, we have another question on display. Sorry. Okay, so are your organization's controls effectively protecting your digital trust? So let's take a look at that. What is your assessment regarding the controls that are in your organizations at the moment? Do you feel comfortable that those are definitely working the way they should be? For the most part, not quite. We need to improve a lot, and perhaps you don't know. So take a look at the question. Please respond to that, and then we will provide some feedback and then some commentary when your responses are captured. So we'll take a few moments, let you respond to it. Okay, so as we take a look at their responses, we will be providing some. So take a look at those. So looking at yes, definitely. About 19% of you said that. When it comes to, for the most part, about 11%. Not quite. That was 59% of you. And then we need to improve a lot, 11%. So as we take a look at what we're going to cover today, we're going to provide you some ideas on how we can help you improve your digital trust within your organization. As a lot of auditors and compliance professionals and risk professionals are always looking out for, well, how comfortable am I that this new technology or this new process that's being implemented, that it is doing what it's supposed to do and we are protected. So we're going to give you some ideas on how to do just that. All right. Well, thank you very much for responding to that. Be on the lookout for a couple more questions later on. But Chris, how about we take a look now at what digital trust is all about? Can we define it and then take a look in terms of what that means for us as audit, compliance, risk, and so on. The people who are looking at the organization and making sure that things are as best we can, protecting our assets and helping to add value as well. What is digital trust in this context?
Yeah, I think that both you and I are obviously still probably recovering from the digital trust world that SACA put on in May. This is a very big topic in our industry, both yours and mine. And to understand digital trust, we just need to kind of break it down into both words digital. Right. So we have digital and then we have trust. So we have the world of digital, which is computers and networks and all kinds of things, cloud computing, the digitization of our companies, the digitization of our organizations. And what we need to do is saying, all right, because we're moving into these fields, can we trust what it is that we see, hear, work with, etc.? So we have a little bit of a kind of a rundown of this. And the essential definition is the confidence that people have in the digital systems they use daily. And the reason why is quite simple. If you are a user of digital technology, and it could be something as simple as, one of these devices that you might have, whether it's an iPhone, an Android based device, you expect a certain level of security. You expect a certain level of reliability. It's going to work when you need it to work, and it's not going to fail on you. And the fact is that you have lots of, whether it's your personal photos, whether it's work documents, whether it's emails that are being sent, there is a certain sense of privacy or privacy, as we'd say in the UK, and the ethical use of any data that then moves across platforms and devices. Remember, one of the biggest things that people misunderstand, maybe not so much in the computer and in the audit and the risk industry, but people that just use these devices forget that social media platforms, things like Meta, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok and all these that people use sometimes for entertainment, sometimes for building their brand. Well, those platforms are handling your personal identifiable information, PII. Can you trust that? And so that comes into that digital trust. And this really separates the dependable from unreliable services. If there's a service where you know that your data is locked down, you are the only one that has access to it, and or only a small group of people have access to it, and it is protected from the we would say the nefarious forces of evil out there, the hackers that come in, the people that want to, whether that's a nation state or whether that's just a group of people, some are out there that they want to gain access to your information. Can we trust the platforms? Can we trust the devices that we are operating on? That, there's been big, Dr. Hernan, I know you've seen this and read this, big companies like Google, like Microsoft, like Apple have been in front of, here in the United States, our government, our Congress, have been questioning them about how they handle their data, the data that we give them. And there has been some questions that have been asked that make you think, can I trust these organizations? Can I use these organizations in a way that helps me, but at the same time doesn't come back around on the other side and hurt me, cost me money, cost me reputation, cost me my identity. And so we see that this is what, Hernan, is what digital trust is all about.
And to your point about how all of these things intersect, they are critical for the success of organizations, right? We've seen so many examples, and you mentioned several just now, where organizations have done things that sometimes people may have taken exception to, and it has hurt them in their stock price. Perhaps customers don't want to do business with them anymore. Business partners don't want to do business with them anymore. So there is a huge implication to this, and it is not just a conceptual topic that we need to understand and put aside. It is something that's affecting organizations increasingly every day because it feeds into the strategic goals and initiatives. And so many organizations, I will say just about all of them today, depend on some level of digital trust because a lot of what we're doing is providing services and a lot of it is being done through computer systems. And the capture of the data, the use of the data, and then the further sharing of it, whether it's internally or with parties outside, all of those things are concerns of the customers and the clients and business partners. So, neglecting to pay attention to this can come at a very high cost. And increasingly, also to your point, we're looking at how compliance is probably going to start getting involved in this increasingly so. It started already, but we're probably going to see more of it. Of course, GDPR, a lot of state laws in the United States and increasingly around the world have started looking at this and saying, you know what, there are a number of things about this that we want to make sure organizations are careful about. So digital trust matters ethically, matters financially, matters strategically. There's a lot behind it, and we just want to make sure we start to think in terms of, okay, those large data sets that we explained in the previous piece, where we're talking about how we educate the large language models and AI in many cases. How do we train it? Where's that data coming from? And how is it being used? And what do we do with it? So, all of these things fit into this concept around digital trust. And the better we are within the organization at collecting, using, and then handing off, as the case may be, and then disposing of it, the higher the digital trust might be among our customers. So now let's turn our attention to another thing, and it has to do with what's happening at most organizations. So this is a bit of a conceptual framework and some of the dynamics in our economy, not just the United States, but globally. So what is happening at typical organizations as relates to this topic, and what should we, as auditors, risk compliance professionals, IT and cybersecurity professionals, be on the lookout for? What's happening so that we can start to perhaps do a gap analysis within our organization. So, Chris, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you just really brought up, which I think is key, is as IS auditors, especially in that space in the information systems auditing, we're always on the lookout for what do we need to be looking for? Do we even know? I mean, one of the big things that we always say to people that work in that industry is your technical competence matters, or at least having a very good understanding of the organization that you are walking into, what type of business they do, what type of technology that they use. Well, now that you're bringing in this chat GPT, or we would just say AI in general, as well as the large language models and these things. So what are we looking for? Well, a couple of things, and here's kind of a little bit of a laundry list that Dr. Hernan and I came up with that I think is important for all of us in the IS audit world to think about, to consider. Now, the first thing is going to be, do they have appropriate staff to support and assess digital trust? I would say right now, most companies that I've either worked with or I talk to as both a trainer, as a consultant, is they're not even sure about some of these areas of digital trust. In fact, that kind of dovetails into the next point of lack of awareness, where we've been doing certain things so long that we kind of get into this comfort zone of this is the 10th audit I've done in the last 5 years. We pretty much have this routine. I have my checklists and what I do. And have we asked? Have we asked the right questions? That's important. Does the company, does the organization, are they even aware of these risks that they face? And there's probably no clear ownership of digital trust. The term, I would say, has only become, I don't want to say popular, but something that is more widespread, probably in the last 3 to 5 years. In fact, up until about 3 years ago, it was something that, most GRC folks were talking about, but not a lot of other people were talking about. So if you have organizations, large organizations, they might not even have somebody that's assigned to own that concept,
Mhm.
that's a dangerous thing. Insufficient training provided. When we start talking about, because remember, we're referring this primarily in this realm of something like a chat GPT, utilizing AI in our organizations. Have we trained our internal folks to understand this? So if I'm an IS auditor and I step into this, I'm going to find out, has there even been any training offered? And I have a sneaking suspicion, no, there hasn't. Or it's been a watch a webinar with Chris and Hernan, and that's been their training, which is good. Thank you so much for doing that. But at the same time, Hernan, I think that's one of the biggest things. Is it's not just senior management, right? Which we talk about, no senior management buy-in.
Right.
Not investing in the digital trust tools. But wouldn't you agree that when you have not trained hardly anybody in the organization on what this is and how it aligns with digital trust, that is a recipe for disaster for any organization?
It absolutely is. And part of the challenge is that there's so much excitement around the tools, and ChatGPT being one of those, of course, but there are so many others, right? We spoke about, and you mentioned DALI and several others that are capturing a lot of our attention and imagination, and people are using those. But the question also becomes, how are they being implemented? Are people using it through the let's call it the auspices of the IT and cybersecurity groups that are basically looking at that and then providing some oversight as to what's being done? Or are people on their own buying subscriptions, downloading the tool and just implementing it in their operations without anyone having any oversight? Which brings us to your point, Chris, which is that there's a lack of awareness about what they are, which ones are better than which, and what are some of the precautionary measures we need to put in place as we adopt these tools. What do we need to know to protect ourselves? So we talk about ChatGPT quite a bit, but there are a lot of other tools that people are starting to use, and I'm wondering to what extent it is happening at a decentralized level. And to your point about training, and you mentioned this, I just wanted to underscore it. It is not just for senior management, it's not just for the IT and cybersecurity group, it is not just for the auditors in the organization, it is not just for employees, it is for all of those groups. They need to have a sense as to what these are and what are some of the things we need to be on the lookout for. And in many organizations, that is not happening, or at least not yet. So this opens an opportunity for another question, and asking our audience, what is your experience with this? How many of the conditions that are displayed here, how many of the conditions at typical organizations apply to your organization? All 6 of the ones we shared with you? 3 to 5 of them, 1 or 2 of them, or none of them? We're curious. What is your experience? What are you seeing? And once again, think about what this means and how you can start to use that information from a gap analysis perspective as you serve your organization. So how many of the conditions at typical organizations apply to your organization? Okay, so as we get the responses, we're going to then, like we did the first time, we're going to provide that feedback and then some of the thoughts we have about it. So we're looking at about 15% of you said all 6 of them. 33% of you said 3 to 5. So that's about 48%. So about half of you said 3 to 6, basically. Then we have 45% of you said 1 or 2, and then 8% of you said none of them. So that's good, by the way. We have some of you that have an environment where some of these things have been addressed, and that is very encouraging for the rest of us. And then we see that we have a lot of opportunity for improvement. So again, the content we're sharing with you here, and of course, all of you will have access to these materials as well. You should probably, this is our suggestion, is that you take a look at this and use it in your audit planning, in your risk assessment, in your conversations with individuals within the organization, and start to use some of these things that we are preparing for you and we're talking to in this session. But use that as one of the things that you have to begin that conversation and to start preparing that gap analysis to understand where there may be some opportunities for improvement. We're not only thinking in terms of what is not working, of course, that is a primary concern of all auditors and compliance professionals, but we probably also want to start looking for centers of excellence within organizations. So, as you are engaging your stakeholders with some of these questions, and let's say one unit somewhere happens to have a training program they set up, or they have already gotten senior management involved, or there's an investment and there's a good process to screen, and the methodology has incorporated the rationale behind the selection of some of these AI tools. That'll be a great thing to also know, because that could be a best practice within your own organization that may be transferable to others where they have not yet done that. So all of these are part of the ways that I encourage viewers to take advantage of what we're talking about and apply it in your work so you can hit the ground running and use it to your advantage. So let's go back to the content we're talking about here. And as far as how we see and how the oversight is done within the organization, one of the things that is always important is to think of it from the perspective of governance and what the organization is doing from that leadership perspective and that strategic perspective in terms of how it applies to different topics. And in this case, how does governance fit into this? So, Chris, let's talk about the need for governance as this field evolves, not only broadly, but quickly.
Yeah, the thing that I think is probably the most important is that as we consider this from a GRC type of environment with the governance, risk, and compliance, is to think about it from what we typically do as an IS auditor is we do risk based, like you said, risk based planning of our audits and what we do. So probably the first thing that we want to think about is, all right, what are some of the identifiable risks that we find utilizing these type of GPT based, not just chat GPT, but GPT based programs and applications in environments that people are starting to implement. Well, probably the first one, of course, is going to be bias, where people have that sense of, we have to be on the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, as I like to say sometimes, of technology. And some people are going to be, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And then you're going to have other organizations where they're much more, their risk capacity, their risk appetite and thresholds are a lot less. So we got to watch out that if we come in with a bias already pre-built in, or if the organization has one pre-built in, that could affect the organization and how you build controls and how you build out the compliance that you're asking for of an organization's performance without a conscience. Now, this is a concept that we've seen not just with AI. I mean, we've seen this back when cloud computing came in, where now no longer we have our equipment on our premises. So who really cares about it? It's out in the cloud. We'll let them deal with it. And so we are more concerned about performance without thinking about what are the ramifications that come with this. Now, I got to tell you something, that third bullet there is something that has been really big in the news, especially in the entertainment industry, where we have had certain I would say musicians and artists that have pretty much have lawsuits out there about how like songs that have been taken and redone, or their lyrics reused, or their images or videos or whatever their intellectual property has been from an entertainment standpoint being used, and they're furious about it because they don't get any money from it. They don't. They weren't asked if that could be used. Now think about it from a business standpoint. If you have intellectual property, and I think Dr. Hernan kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, where he said you've got somebody who comes in to their office and they start using ChatGPT, and they start inputting some intellectual property information. Now, they're not doing it with the intent to steal it or to blast it all over the internet. But if they are connected to the public chat GPT and they put that information out there, that information is now included as part of the LLM. So that means if anybody asks for somebody to write some code, is a great example. Somebody has said, "Hey, write a code." The original author, write me code based upon this snippet that I've got that will allow me to do X, Y, or Z. Well, guess what? There's going to be other companies out there that might be using this, going, "Hey, help me write code based upon this to do X, Y, and Z." And of course, the GPT engine is going to say, "Ooh, I've got this information. This is new stuff. I'm going to slap that into that new code that I'm going to send back to a different individual." Well, guess what? That intellectual property is now in the hands of and being used by another organization. That is a huge risk when you have people that are using the public-based LLM of something like ChatGPT 4.0, which is, as of the webinar that we're doing right now, that is the current one that is out there right now. That is dangerous. That is risky for things that we have there. That kind of ties into that next point that we make about the leakage of sensitive information. Information about people that are on staff. It could be leaking information about something as we think as innocuous as salaries of individuals, things like that. And if you think about it, when we come to cybersecurity, think about how we base things like password policies, how we use two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, where somebody has to answer a couple of questions to get their password back. Dr. Hernan, we've been kidding around sometimes about asking you about, "Hey, by the way, where did you graduate from high school? What's the name of your best friend right now?" And when we do that, and that information somehow gets out there, well, guess what? The people that are nefarious, the bad actors out there, are going to take that information. They're going to use it for their advantage. Well, that's a risk that we face. So we've kind of given you some of the risks. And of course, most of you that I was great to see, quite a few of you were saying, "Hey, actually, none of those conditions exist. We're really on top of this." I'm just curious about maybe you can, hey, ask us a question or type it in. Tell us some of the controls that you've placed or put into place. But here's a list of controls that we, I think are important that can help us mitigate against the risks that we just talked about. The first, obviously, is going to be, oh, surprise, surprise, awareness and education, or back to training. Remember how I said making people aware that when you come in and you want to utilize ChatGPT 4.0 within the company and you're using the content, again, like I said, most people aren't thinking about doing this. They're not trying, they have no ill intent. They're not trying to do something bad. They're just not thinking about it. Well, having that awareness campaign about how, what we're going to do. That's if you want to allow it to happen. Because notice the next bullet. Regulations at international, national, and state levels might require you to say, absolutely not. You are not allowed to use the public-facing GPT, chat GPT. Now, can you create your own private LLM? Absolutely. Can you use it internally? Yes, but you're not allowed to connect to the outside world. You can't feed, as a good friend of mine that's in big data, he goes, "You're not feeding data to the hungry beast, that's constantly, that it wants more data, more information for that." And then, of course, the policies at the organizational level, kind of what I just touched on there, is that you aren't allowed to use ChatGPT within your organization, and you aren't allowed to put any of the company's data, information, documentation, none of that is allowed to be then placed into that big, huge, universal LLM that ChatGPT runs off. And so there we have it, Dr. Hernan. We got some risks that we have looking at, and also some potential controls that we can also look at.
Excellent. Very much in agreement with all of the items mentioned there. I just want to add a couple of things. You mentioned bias. And you did a very good job explaining what bias means and how it can seep into this process and contaminate the process in such a way that you get unintended outcomes out of the whole thing. One of the things to be very careful about, in addition to your selection of the tools and how you decide to use it or not, is what you do with the output. And what can happen is that if you trust the output without understanding what data went into it and how it is being processed and the outputs created, you may feed that output, take that output, and then make a decision that may be biased from the source, and that may end up you making a biased decision as well. And again, I'm just going to mention a couple of quick examples of how we are learning about some of the implications, and they're very impactful situation around bias when, for example, when you're looking at how loans are granted, and if the data that is being used to assess risks uses certain demographics, geographic elements, age, employment dynamics, and so on, based on the predominance of data. If that output is then going to then lead the person who is then deciding, or the system that's deciding who's going to get a loan and at what interest rate or on what terms, they may end up creating a bias towards certain groups. You can also have it with employment. You can have it with promotions, right? All of those types of things are very troublesome, at least potentially. And another thing I wanted to share, and that goes back to your point about how the data is being fed and who has access to it, because you did a very good job explaining that outside boundary, right? Looking outside and using that the external source of, for example, ChatGPT. But even if you create it within the organization, have you established those parameters as to who within the organization has access to that data? For example, if you're going to feed it compensation details, and that is then going to be used to do some analytics, and you're going to use some of these language models and generative, the GPT, they're going to then use that to make decisions about who gets raises and other HR-related things. Can someone else within the organization who is then using the same tool get access to the data and some of the other things that are available now that that is within the data set within the organization? So driving those controls around access. Again, we've been talking about access for decades. Once again, fundamentals matter. So who has access to what in terms of input, processing, and outputs, and how are those things working from a process perspective? Once again, what's old is new, making sure we're also be mindful of that. So very good, Chris. Thank you very much for helping us better understand those risks, those controls. And now let's turn to our audience and ask them from their perspective if they have implemented large language model software like ChatGPT and other AI tools within their organizations. So have they done it within the past year? Not yet, but will within the next 6 months or so. No immediate plans. That'll be C, no immediate plans. Or D, don't know. Give you a few moments to answer that question. Very interested to see what's your experience regarding this. Wonderful. Very good. So we're gathering the last piece of information here as we are responding to these questions. But let's take a look. Okay, here we are. So yes, within the past year, 7% of you. We're looking in terms of not yet, but we will within the next 6 months. That's another 17%. Now, 51%, that's a very large number with no immediate plans. That's very interesting. I guess they have not succumbed yet to the temptation to embrace it. But 51% of you said no immediate plans, and then 24% of you said don't know. Now, one note about that, and so for those of you who have attended other webinars with me in the past, you know that one of the things that I always remind people of is that when there's that I don't know option in some of these questions, also think about that, because if you don't know, that may be something you want to find out. right? We're thinking in terms of risk, controls, governance, and what auditors do. And we're thinking in terms of what is happening that I don't know about? And is there a gap? Is there an exposure that I need to know about and that maybe senior management and the board needs to know about? So those I don't knows are not just to do a catch all at the end, but it's also a prompt for you that if that is your scenario, maybe you want to ask around and find out if that is something that you need to gain some knowledge about, right? So that is an important thing to also take away. Now, Chris, let's take a look at another piece, which is again we've looked at what happened in the past and how we got to where we are now. It is always helpful to look ahead. So, what are some of the things we need to keep in mind as we do that?
Well, I think many of the things probably most of you out there in the audience are already starting to think of. The nice thing is going, wow, okay, either one, I already knew this. Two, oh wow, that someone mentioned me to it, and I should probably get to it. Or three, yeah, wow, this is something new for us. This is something that we should take a look at. We should pay attention to. What are some of the things that we are going to see just even moving forward, or what are some things that we can do moving forward? So probably the first thing is that think about this, and this has been true, not just with AI, but think about when cloud first came out. Many of you who are watching this probably remember when the cloud started becoming a thing, when Amazon said, hey, look, we've got all these computers with massive amounts of storage. Why don't we sell that out to the rest of the public and they can put in their data and information into our S3 buckets, and they'll pay for very small amounts of money to have access to these very redundant, highly available, reliable systems. And in the beginning, a lot of people were like, whoa, I don't know. What is this? How can I use this? So we need to keep up with technology is probably the first thing we would say as it moves forward, because as the cloud developed, and then it became not just the storage, it was also, hey, we can also use this to do performance and processing. We can literally move our on-premises environments out into a cloud and use it. Or maybe we keep some back and we use part out there. So technology has gotten better and better and better. Well, think about that with AI. As technology moves forward, we need to at least, especially from the GRC, the risk, the compliance, as auditors, we need to keep up with what that technology is, so that way we can ask the right questions. We can look into the right areas and make those assessments, have those findings and put together those work papers that cover everything, including the new technology. We want to leverage existing frameworks. I love what Dr. Hernan says, get back to the basics, get back to the foundational. I mean, access is access. Whether it's through something like a ChatGPT or whether it's just somebody trying to access email, right? So these are things that we want to stick with. Use those existing frameworks, whether it's ISACAs or others that are out there, the many that we utilize. Make sure that senior management is on board with this, because the one thing I think I've been, pardon the expression, preaching to the choir about this for many, many years, from project management to IT service management, now into the world of audit, is that if the senior management isn't on board and not promoting and actively implementing this, it's not going to happen. It just doesn't. And so we need to implement and enforce these policies, the processes, and monitoring mechanisms that will allow us to make sure that people are in compliance, that the organization as a whole is in compliance, different business units are in compliance, and even down to the individual being in compliance with what they're doing. Probably the biggest thing that you should probably do, as maybe not immediately after this webinar, but hey, maybe give yourself an hour, have a lunch, then go do it, but perform risk assessment. Love the fact that many of you that were responding saying, yeah, we're aware of a lot of this. We are looking at digital trust. We understand the digital trust world. Great. In that case, make sure that you are now stepping into that risk assessment moving forward. And then if you discover something in your organization or your senior management, if you're the senior management, you're moving forward with these new technology, with these new processes and practices, well, guess what? Make sure that you add new controls if necessary. Or I have a feeling like if you have access controls already in place, just to use that as an example, you might just need to tweak them a little bit, modify them a little bit, so that way you're now including some of the new technologies that are now being implemented. Because overall, I mean, I think the important thing is, and not just to think about it from our perspective and in like internally and siloed, but also work with business partners to increase that level of digital trust and safely enjoy the benefits of the technology as it advances the things that we have. Because I guarantee you, you're going to have marketing and salespeople come to you from these new organizations that are built almost entirely on AI and saying, hey, we can help your organization. Our product, our service will allow you to get data and information just like that. And in fact, we're pretty happy here at ACI. We have a new AI based assessment tool that we're going to be using that you can find out all about by just checking us out here at ACI. But, that's going to be something cool. You need to be sure, Hernan, that you are prepared for this. And I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely. Yes. I think that as we look ahead, it's going to be very exciting. A lot of things are going to happen very quickly. And in some cases, the forecast is for it to happen very fundamentally too, right? Very significant changes happening rapidly. So we need to be prepared and be on the lookout and try to keep up with these changes as they come about. Now, one of the things you mentioned there as well, and I just wanted to share with our audience, is that NIST, which we have used, many of us have used NIST frameworks for so many different things over the years. They have an AI risk management framework as well. So take a look at that. That'll probably provide you with some insights that you can then look at and hopefully maybe adapt a bit, but implement in your organization to help you with this very important topic. So thank you, Chris, for helping us better understand these concepts, making those connections, by the way. It's not just the concepts in isolation, but what we are proud of is looking at these concepts and how they relate to what we do. And from a GRC perspective, governance, risk, compliance perspective, how we can take these concepts related to what matters most in the organization and help the organization pursue and achieve its strategic and operational goals. Let's turn now to our Q&A section, and we're going to entertain questions from our audience. We have a few minutes, and the first question we're going to respond to is from Harvey. The question is, do you suggest a separate training or expanding our cybersecurity awareness training? What do you think, Chris? What's your leaning with regards to this? Do you suggest a separate training or expanding the existing cybersecurity awareness training?
I think this comes into what you and I in fact, when we were at the conference, we were talking about this, about, the maturity of an organization. If an organization is lockstep in and has a very well thought out and mature training program that is involved with cybersecurity and whatever the latest and greatest threats that come across the landscape that companies are facing, not only from external sources, but also internal, as you mentioned. I think that would be probably more of you need to expand the cybersecurity awareness training to include things like the utilization of a generative AI, or what's allowed, what's not, and why we don't do it. I mean, think about how phishing emails. Phishing and spear phishing has become something that is it has just exponentially grew. And I can remember back about 6-7 years ago, nobody really talked about that in their security training, or it might get a brief mention. Nowadays, almost every company I work with and talk with, that's one of the things they do. In fact, they do test phishing campaigns within their organization to see if they can catch employees, that just, they don't understand, or they didn't really listen the first time they went through the mandatory end user security training. So I think that would be good. But if your organization maybe isn't at that maturity level, and I would be interested in hearing your opinion on this as well, Dr. Hernan, maybe that's when you need a separate training that will allow you to then just talk about what is happening in that world and what that employees, workers, even partners, third-party individuals that come and work within your organization, what it is that they need to know. What are your thoughts on that?
I concur with what you said. I believe that it depends on the maturity of the organization and the quality of the existing training. In some cases, the training may be quite lengthy as it is already, in which case you may want to have a separate training for this purpose. However, I am also a big believer that a one-time training is not usually the best solution. So what you can also do is have maybe one comprehensive training, but then have reminders that you can then do mini trainings, perhaps every quarter, and have that reminder frequently. In your response, you mentioned testing for phishing, for example, right? Maybe a test email is sent out, or in people where people gather, maybe they have flash drive or thumb drive that they drop around to see if people are going to pick it up and plug them in and various things like those. Well, they're testing to see if people are going to act in ways that are not consistent with what they were taught. So we can do things like that here when it comes to digital trust and all of these related subjects. Similarly, make sure that we have reminders periodically so that it's not just a once a year thing, but it's something that we keep reminding them for this subject in particular, but also the broader conversation around cybersecurity. Very good. So let's turn to our next question. So we have Louis asking, is a recommended first step that my organization implement a company-wide policy on the use of LMNs like ChatGPT? And then adding the comment there is, we don't have one yet.
Wow, that's a great question. I think that the thing that you need to do, and this is just like anything, we tend to, and Hernan, I know you've seen this in your many years, we tend to say go, set, ready, instead of ready, set, go. There is a need for you to probably, Louis, and this is just my recommendation, just coming from me, is that one of the things you'll want to do is take a look at what is the organization from a strategic and tactical view. What are you trying to achieve, and what makes the most sense? I mean, you don't want to just say, oh, there's risk involved with using an LLM within our organization, or even using the ChatGPT external LLM. True. But does that mean that you don't use it? No, that doesn't mean that necessarily. But however, it depends on your organization. And that's where you have to have that conversation where senior management sits down with people, by the way, that understand the technology and that can explain, well, here are some of the issues, here are some of the risks that you face by using it, but also what are some of the benefits? Well, there are great benefits in utilizing this technology if you do it correctly. So what I would say is, as the first step, is to sit down and discuss what is it that our organization is trying to accomplish? What is our vision? What is our strategy? What is our tactics going forward? And from there, creating the policy based on that. Policies must be based on two primary things. One, any external regulation. Obviously, if you're in healthcare, it's, got to follow HIPAA. If you're in finance, Sarbanes-Oxley, and a slew of other things. If you work in utilizing data, especially privacy in Europe, GDPR. So that's going to force you to do certain things. But then it's also, what is our company wanting to accomplish? What are our goals? So that would be my recommendation. Hernan, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that a policy without the buy-in is not going to get you very far. So yes, start with a conversation, get people on board with the ideas, but don't wait too long to have a policy, because you want to institutionalize the expectations. And to your point, Chris, about making reference to some of those frameworks and regulations, it also helps to establish further the authority and have this policy communicated to the employees. And if you can have the endorsement of the CEO as well, that will also help it. So it's not just, and I'm not just saying just as a diminutive, but rather sometimes people hear about a policy change, some kind of a organizational dynamic that's taking place, and they say, oh, okay, that's just another email, another announcement. Well, this is very important. So from that perspective, having that authority behind it saying, hey, everybody, listen up. This is important to us now and going forward. Here is a policy, and we would like to make sure that you understand it. And if you have any questions, then provide also a place that people can go with questions. So I agree with you. And then just a couple additional thoughts. But I think that in the aggregate, yes, this is what we would recommend as starting points if you don't have anything like that yet in place. The next question is from Mike, and it relates back to DevSecOps. So, should digital trust elements be included in our DevSecOps project management process? So, generally speaking, some of the security elements should be there already based on what DevSecOps are all about. But if they are not yet for some reason and you have the title, but you don't have the detail within your system development life cycle, as it used to be called, and DevSecOps as the most recent label and name for this process, you probably really want to have that built in quickly because that is a very important aspect of security and quite often getting the return on your investments. Because if you have a system and a process where the users don't trust what is being done with their data, then that is probably not going to end very well. Chris, any additional thoughts on that question from Mike?
Yeah, I think that one thing we always need to remember is what is DevSecOps. Uh, it's the world of DevOps, which of course is that highly collaborative world, and we realize that because we've pulled down the wall of confusion and people are just passing information back and forth, and just kind of having it out there in the wild, as we used to say, that's not a very secure environment. And so, thus, we brought in the security part, where are we being careful about how we are doing that? Does every single person on a DevOps team need to know every single detail about every single thing? No, probably not. What kind of access do they need? What kind of oversight is in place? So if you just take those, it's kind of like what you said earlier, Hernan, in the fact is that the basics of what's in place are still solid. They're still, what we need to be doing as organizations. Rules about access, controlling who having those data owners, so that way we know, are we allowed to? And then how does that integrate with business process owners or business units? And so if you're using a DevSecOps, which of course is kind of adding that in versus a SecDevOps, which is security by design, and then you do the DevOps. Either way, we need to consider how does this affect what we're sharing, the information, and we also want to make sure that we're not, clamping down so hard where we've lost the effectiveness of that DevOps type of environment. But we have to be careful about that. And unfortunately, that might mean maybe being a little bit more, to use an old word, draconian in the beginning, and then slowly letting go. So that way we don't just open it up, have a major issue happen, and then now we're scrambling to recover. Where instead we're like, all right, we'll let off a little bit, make sure everything's okay, maybe let off a little bit more. That would be my advice to anybody that's trying to working in that.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much, Chris. We have another question from Madeline, and we're getting close to the end of our time, but we have the ability to answer this question. So, Madeline asks, how do you define plagiarism when using ChatGPT and AI? Ethically, should I add ChatGPT as a reference source? What do you think, Chris?
That's a good question, isn't it? The issue is, I don't think the rules have changed, have they? When you use something that is not generated purely from your own, we would say, data that you've either created or your thoughts or your words, then you are required by almost every organization I've ever worked with. And of course, way back in the day, I had a journalism background where I was on television and as a news reporter. And it was, unless you were the one that came up with that thought and those are your exact words, you need to say or quote or give a reference for that. And so I would say the safe way of doing that is to say, this portion was created from my input and ChatGPT. So that way you're still giving yourself credit for coming up with the original question, but at the same time, people need to understand where certain things are coming from. A good example of that recently out in the news is somebody was testing ChatGPT in a law school, and they were trying to write a paper, and they asked ChatGPT to kind of write a whole bunch of stuff and to give obviously previous court cases. And ChatGPT made up, it actually invented the court cases. They didn't exist. and only because it was like, well, it didn't have one, so it made up one. Well, now the student, I believe it was a student, if I remember the story correctly, what they found out, and they were given a failing grade, and they were told that they had, done all this stuff, and they were like, whoa, and they finally came back and said, well, I didn't do that. That was ChatGPT. And of course, the school said, well, then you should have told us that. So those are some steps, I think. I think the safe thing to do is always to give credit where credit is due. Where did you get this information? We do that on websites. We do that on where we got the graphics, things like that. So that would be my thought, Hernan. I don't know if you have anything different or anything to add.
Not different, but I just want to add a couple of things. I agree with what you said, Chris. A couple of things to add to this have to do with the quality of the information, because in some cases, and what you're alluding to, I believe the term that they use is hallucination, when it makes up information, or if it comes up with incorrect information. So you need to own what you're writing. So the recommendation now is to check what you're getting to make sure that it makes sense and that you're willing to put your name behind it, in addition to referencing your sources, like you said. But check the work before you submit it, because there have been documented cases, like you well explained, Chris, that sometimes it's incorrect or you have hallucinations. Now, the other thing about it is, and I believe that in the future, we're probably going to hear a lot more about forensic dimension evolving, where we're going to have a mechanism to determine whether or not what is being provided is, let's call it, real or realistic or true, and whether it is generated by AI. Because in some cases, what we have is we have these deep fakes, and we have deep fakes in text, in audio, in video, and many other ways. So I believe that that is going to help us to some extent in terms of documenting the source of information. But at the end of the day, I agree with you that, yes, we need to make sure that we stand behind what we are submitting. So if we're using AI as a tool, we need to be mindful about how we're using it in our process. Now, one last thing before we finish today has to do with CPE requirements and credits. So if you were here the full duration of the webinar and you responded to those 3 questions, you should be eligible for 1 CPE credit, and that should be, because these are our NASBA certified credits, you should be able to confidently submit those to certifying bodies like the IAA and ISACA and so on. So I just wanted to share that piece of information to those of you who join us today. So thank you very much for joining, for participating, and please stay attuned to this evolving field, because there's a lot happening and there's a lot more happening in the future. So we will continue to have events like this where we can talk about these topics and help share some of our thoughts and help you also chart the best course going forward so you can better help your organizations. And Chris, thank you very much as well for sharing your thoughts, your inputs, and your insights and your experiences with us so that we can be better prepared going forward. So thank you as well. Thank you very much. And I hope to see all of you soon again.